Peer review is not about editing. It's about revising, it's about making suggestions, it's about thinking as a writer about someone else's paper. If they hear it from 2 or 3 other students, as well as from the instructor, that it's not just, oh, what is she looking for, but what really is the practice of good writing.
We look at, the teaching of writing as a 4-year project while we've got them here. So we look for the freshman class to get them some distance, and we felt like this got them down the road.
This peer review isn't just for writing a paper for this class, but peer review is something that across the academy this happens in scholarship. So what they're doing is not just busy work, but it's something that's important to the writing process. Better papers are easier to grade.
I end up having higher quality student writing to grade. And as you may be aware, the better written something is, the less time you have to spend grading.
Peer review I also sort of use as a grading preview, so I try to focus the peer review questions on things that I'm going to be interested in looking at for the paper.
I get maybe 1 in 100 students who needs to come talk to me about a paper after I've graded it, because they know why they got that grade.
Right.
Their peers told them what to fix, I worked with them, and they either fixed it or they didn't, and here's the feedback, and we've already talked about this, you've discussed it with your peers, you know whether or not you did well on that assignment before you turn it in.
Right.
The use of peer review ties very closely to the use of the rubric, where you specifically make explicit the expectations and outcomes you're looking for from the students, and walk them through levels of performance that are unacceptable, acceptable, superior, and what have you. We spent a lot of time on the rubric.
Okay.
And so for me, I think the key was the investment of a half a day, really, up front on the rubric.
And students, I think, also find peer review generally very useful if they are provided with direction. If they don't feel that they have direction, that's when they feel peer review is least beneficial to them.
Then they go through cycles with the Writing Center, with their peers, and then a final rewrite. That on one hand, and the other hand, honestly, is just letting them realize engineers write, and they've got to know how to write.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the beginning, I tried to group them according to their majors, because I think they're most comfortable offering feedback to others in their majors, at least initially.
So walking through in front of the classroom with the modeling and saying, here's what I'm looking for, and just starting with something that's working really well and explaining why. And I start small. I only start with 1 or 2 things at a time and then slowly build.
And I'm explicit in my prompt for the peer review that this is what they need to be looking for.
Many of my peer review assignments require them to say, yes, the thesis is amply supported, here are a couple of examples, here are a couple points of support. I think it's just human nature to see a comma error or spelling error and want to point that out, and I think that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I definitely put that low on the totem pole of importance in peer review.
If they see the same kinds of questions over and over and over, it tends to become another rote exercise for students. But if you vary the format, if you ask them to perform in different ways every time, they'll be freshly engaged.
Right.
And I'll also make sure that they don't have the same person peer review their papers, so they're not reading some. So each peer review is reading fresh.
Peer review can have the added bonus of supplying a real audience, right? Because too often students are just writing for a teacher, and I think that's a way to break out of that. If peer reviewers can't identify the thesis or can't identify support or ways that the assignment meets the assignment requirements, then I think that student suddenly becomes aware there's a problem.
Right.
I swear, so many times people say, I love the peer review. Not because somebody's fixing their paper for them, but it helps them to see mistakes that they're not seeing on their own, that they're reading over.
Employers, what does the employer want? What does your employer want? When your boss asks you to write a report for the shareholders, what goes in there? How do you look at it from their perspective? And simply being able to look at it objectively from my perspective as an instructor helps them understand what they're trying to learn and do. Again, the nice thing about using something like a revision and a peer review based process like that is, they see what they're doing, they see what their peers are doing, and there are no surprises at grade time. Which doesn't mean everybody gets A's, but there are no surprises at grade
Right.
time. Okay.
Right.
Then the students understand what it is I am trying to get them to do as my outcome, as my course goal, as whatever we're doing in the curriculum. And that also assists their ability to engage with it and write to it.
One of the very strong common themes that came out is my peers can help me write better. And we want them to learn teamwork. We want them to learn that the major, the job, being an engineer is a team thing. It was nice that they realized that it's not just helpful in doing the math and the science and that part of engineering, but it's useful in doing the writing part of engineering. And so I felt like it was a very much of a win-win. Win for my time, a win for their learning, and not just for writing, but for the whole package of being an engineer and working as part of a team.
Yeah.
What I do if it's an online course, and this was something I started using in the spring actually, and I've carried it in through the summer because it was successful. I have my students broken into writing groups, is what I call them, and the writing groups, they stay in them from the start of one project until the completion of that project, and then we change groups. That way, hopefully everybody works with everyone else in the class at some point. So what the writing groups do is from one week to the next, there's always required discussion board postings because we use Blackboard. I haven't really found them to be particularly time consuming to take that approach with the online, and I've had several students tell me that they really like having that component in the course because with an online course they often don't feel they have that community with each other. So writing groups and peer review, those are ways of responding to that challenge.
Electronic peer review and using highlighting. Students love to make things different colors. I don't know, we all like to color things, right? And so one of the things that I do with their argument papers is have them, highlight signal phrases in green, direct quotes in blue, citations in red, and say explanations of each quote in yellow. Every quote should have all of those things, so if the colors aren't stacking up in the right order, right, the students can easily have a graphic representation of what needs to be fixed, and it's not requiring the peer reviewer to write a lengthy explanation of why you need a signal phrase here, or, the absence of highlighting serves as a comment, and that seems to make them more comfortable with the process of critiquing other students' works, because the thing that I have found students get most anxious about with peer review is writing anything that's not nice, right? They don't want to say anything negative. And so the highlighting takes the risk out of that in a lot of ways. And instead of saying something bad, you're just not highlighting something because it's not there.
Right.
A lot of times students are concerned that they're not expert enough to review others' papers. So one way that I respond to that is I record videos where I step them through sentence by sentence a sample paper, and I tell them, okay, this is what it looks like when I read a paper. This is what I'm focusing on, and I actually never really look at grammar and mechanics when I go through the sample papers. I'm focusing on the major issues. So I'll read the first sentence of the introduction and say, okay, you see how this sentence really engages the reader because it's a question, and so it automatically draws you in.
Online, the way that you can be more of a presence is, I think, designing really strong questions for students, and then still adding your feedback or input on that. Maybe requiring those questions and answers to be submitted to you. I understand teachers don't have a lot of time to comment on some of those things, but maybe a couple of quick comments where, not always necessarily bad ones either, not always, you could say more here, but maybe reassuring or reaffirming them and saying this is a really good peer review comment or a really helpful peer review comment.
There's a reason why as professional scholars we do have people peer review our work. It's not for grammar, but it's to make sure that all points are being covered and covered well.